The morning rain had left the courthouse steps shining like polished glass. Lawyers hurried through the entrance carrying expensive briefcases, reporters clustered around television cameras, and security officers guided people through metal detectors. It was supposed to be just another high-profile civil hearing, but no one knew that before the day was over, one quiet woman would turn the entire courtroom upside down. Clara Bennett stepped through the front doors wearing a simple navy blue coat that had clearly seen better days. She carried an old leather folder under her arm and walked with the calm confidence of someone who had already survived life's worst storms. Her gray-streaked hair was tied neatly behind her head, and there wasn't a single piece of expensive jewelry on her. To everyone watching, she looked like an ordinary middle-aged woman who had wandered into a case far beyond her means. People noticed, but only long enough to dismiss her. In the hallway outside Courtroom 7, several attorneys in tailored suits laughed as they reviewed documents. Among them stood Richard Holloway, the billionaire CEO of Holloway Biomedical, a man celebrated on magazine covers as a visionary entrepreneur. Standing beside him was his lead attorney, Victor Kane, whose reputation for crushing opponents had earned him millions. Victor glanced toward Clara before leaning toward his client with a smirk. "So that's the woman causing all this trouble." Richard barely looked up. "Looks like she can barely afford lunch." The lawyers around them chuckled. One junior associate whispered, "She actually thinks she can win against Holloway Biomedical." Victor laughed loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "She's nobody important. This case will be over in 10 minutes. More laughter echoed through the hallway. Clara heard every word. She didn't argue. She didn't glare. She simply adjusted her folder and quietly walked past them as though their opinions weighed nothing at all. That calmness irritated Richard more than anger would have. "Funny," he muttered. "Most people at least pretend to fight." Inside the courtroom, spectators slowly filled the wooden benches. News reporters whispered to one another, because rumors surrounding the lawsuit had attracted national attention. Official records described Clara as a former employee claiming ownership, rights to technology worth billions of dollars. Almost everyone assumed the lawsuit was hopeless. After all, Holloway Biomedical had an army of attorneys, endless resources, and years of carefully polished public respect. Clara sat alone at the plaintiff's table. No assistants, no entourage, no expensive legal team, just one folder. Across the room, Richard's side occupied nearly an entire row. Lawyers unpacked laptops, assistants organized thick binders, and consultants reviewed charts. The difference couldn't have been more obvious. Even a court clerk quietly wondered if Clara had made a terrible mistake by bringing such an impossible case. The courtroom doors opened. All rise. Everyone stood as Judge Samuel Whitmore entered. Known for his fairness and absolute refusal to tolerate courtroom theatrics, Judge Whitmore nodded politely before taking his seat. "You may be seated." The room settled into complete silence. The judge opened the first case file, Holloway Biomedical versus Clara Bennett. He adjusted his glasses and began reading. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then his eyes stopped. His expression changed. He slowly reread one page, then another. His hand froze. For several long seconds, the courtroom remained completely silent. The judge lifted his eyes toward the woman sitting quietly at the plaintiff's table. His face had gone pale. He looked from the documents to Clara again, as if trying to confirm something he couldn't quite believe. The attorneys exchanged confused glances. Richard frowned. Victor shifted uneasily. Judge Whitmore leaned forward, studying Clara more carefully than anyone expected. Then, almost under his breath, but just loud enough for those nearest the bench to hear, he whispered, "My God." A stunned silence swept across the courtroom. "It's her," The court reporter stopped typing for a heartbeat. Even the bailiff looked puzzled. Richard's confident smile faded. Victor's eyebrows knitted together. Neither of them understood why one of the most respected judges in the state suddenly looked as though he'd seen a ghost. Clara met the judge's gaze without fear. For the first time that morning, a faint smile touched the corner of her lips. It wasn't the smile of someone hoping to win. It was the smile of someone who already knew the truth was finally about to catch up with every lie. The silence in the courtroom lingered for only a few moments before Judge Samuel Whitmore cleared his throat and composed himself. Years on the bench had taught him never to let emotion interfere with justice. Yet the sight of Clara Bennett sitting quietly at the plaintiff's table had awakened memories he had buried long ago. "I believe," he said evenly, "before we proceed, it is important that both parties understand the history behind the claims before this court." Richard Holloway's attorney, Victor Kane, rose immediately. "Your Honor, with respect, the plaintiff's personal history is irrelevant. This is a straightforward ownership dispute." Judge Whitmore fixed him with a firm stare. "I'll decide what is relevant, Mr. Kane." The courtroom fell silent again. Clara remained still, her hands folded neatly over the worn leather folder she had carried for years. She had waited a long time for this day, and patience had become her greatest strength. 12 years earlier, Clara Bennett had been a name known throughout the medical research community. Brilliant but humble, she had spent nearly a decade developing a revolutionary diagnostic technology capable of detecting life, threatening illnesses months before traditional testing methods. Investors called it a miracle. Doctors believed it could save millions of lives, but Clara had never cared about fame. She only wanted her invention to reach hospitals where it could help families avoid the pain she had experienced while watching her own father die from an illness diagnosed too late. To turn her invention into reality, Clara founded Bennett Biotech with her husband, Daniel Bennett, and her closest friend from university, Richard Holloway. She trusted them completely. Daniel handled finances, while Richard managed investors and business operations. Clara focused on research, believing the people she loved would protect the company they had built together. Instead, they protected only themselves. As the company grew, outside investors poured in millions of dollars. Newspapers praised Richard's business genius, while Daniel quietly gained control over the company's legal paperwork. Clara rarely questioned the documents placed before her. She signed what her husband assured her were routine corporate forms. They were anything but routine. Hidden among hundreds of pages were contracts transferring voting rights, patents, and eventually ownership of the company itself. By the time Clara realized what had happened, it was too late. Daniel and Richard accused her of financial misconduct, claiming she had secretly diverted company funds. Forged accounting records appeared almost overnight. Anonymous witnesses came forward with carefully rehearsed stories. Within weeks, the board voted to remove Clara as CEO of the company she had created. The media believed every headline. Founder accused of fraud. Medical genius falls from grace. Investors betrayed. Her reputation collapsed faster than the business had risen. Friends disappeared. Investors refused her calls. Even former employees crossed the street to avoid speaking with her. The greatest betrayal came when Daniel filed for divorce, telling reporters he had been deceived by his own wife. Broken and publicly humiliated, Clara vanished from the business world. What no one knew was that her mother had been diagnosed with a rare neurological disease shortly before the scandal erupted. Clara spent the next several years caring for her full-time in a small rented home, selling nearly everything she owned to cover medical expenses. During those lonely nights, she refused to surrender every newspaper article, every financial record, every email, every contract, every suspicious bank transfer. She quietly collected them all. When her mother passed away peacefully 3 years later, Clara made one promise beside her bedside. "I won't spend my life chasing revenge," she whispered through tears, "but I will fight for the truth." Unknown to Richard and Daniel, international financial investigators had later uncovered evidence that the fraud accusations against Clara had been fabricated. Their findings cleared her name completely, but the report had never received the same attention as the scandal itself. While the world forgot Clara Bennett, she rebuilt her case piece by piece, not with anger, with evidence. Back in the courtroom, Judge Whitmore looked down at the case file once more. He remembered the day 12 years earlier when doctors had used Clara's prototype technology to diagnose his young daughter's heart condition before it became fatal. Without that invention, she would not be alive today. He looked at Clara again with quiet respect. To everyone else, she appeared to be an ordinary woman seeking justice. But to him, she was the forgotten scientist whose work had once saved the person he loved most. And for the first time, Richard Holloway began to wonder if he had underestimated the woman he had spent 12 years trying to erase. The atmosphere inside Courtroom 7 had changed completely. The confidence that had surrounded Richard Holloway and his legal team when the morning began was slowly fading. The smug smiles were gone, replaced by uneasy glances and whispered conversations. Reporters sensed something unusual unfolding and leaned forward with renewed interest, ready to capture every word. Judge Samuel Whitmore looked toward Clara. "Ms. Bennett," he said calmly, "you may present your evidence." Clara stood without rushing. She carried her old leather folder to the evidence table, placing it down with surprising care. Richard couldn't help but smile again. "That's it," he whispered to Victor Kane. "One folder after 12 years. Victor nodded confidently. "This won't last long." Clara opened the folder. Inside were neatly organized documents, each protected in transparent sleeves. She removed the first stack and handed it to the bailiff, who delivered copies to the judge and the defense. "This," Clara began in a steady voice, "is the original patent application for the medical diagnostic system that later became the foundation of Holloway Biomedical." Judge Whitmore examined the first page. At the bottom appeared Clara Bennett's signature, dated nearly 2 years before Richard Holloway had ever claimed involvement in the project. Victor immediately stood objection. "Anyone can produce old paperwork." Clara nodded. "I expected that." She handed over another document. The Patent Office's digital registration logs. Judge Whitmore compared the timestamps. "They match," he said quietly. Victor's confidence slipped for the first time. Clara continued, "For years, I was accused of stealing company funds." She produced several certified bank statements. "These accounts prove every transfer I supposedly authorized occurred while I was attending an international medical conference in Switzerland." Richard frowned. "Impossible. It isn't," Clara replied. She presented airline records, passport stamps, hotel invoices, and conference attendance logs. Every document placed her thousands of miles away, on the exact dates. The fraudulent transactions had supposedly occurred. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Whitmore struck his gavel. "Order." Clara reached into another section of the folder. "I'd now like to submit forensic handwriting analysis conducted by 3 independent laboratories. The reports concluded that signatures authorizing the financial transfers had been forged." Victor's face lost color. Richard's hands tightened around the edge of the defense table. "This is ridiculous," Richard muttered. But Clara wasn't finished. She connected a small flash drive to the courtroom display. I spent years recovering deleted company emails. A forensic specialist called as a witness confirmed their authenticity under oath. The first email appeared on the large courtroom screen. It was from Daniel Bennett to Richard Holloway. Once she's removed from the board, everything belongs to us. Gasps filled the room. Another email followed. Make sure accounting creates records showing Clara approved the transfers. Another. The investors will believe whatever we tell them if the media moves first. Richard's breathing became shallow. Victor lowered his head. One by one, every message painted the same picture. A carefully planned conspiracy to steal Clara's company. Judge Whitmore looked toward the defense. Mr. Holloway, would you like to explain these communications? Richard hesitated. I don't remember those emails. Clara quietly replied, memory fades, digital records don't. A murmur of approval spread through the gallery. Then came the final surprise. The plaintiff calls her next witness. The courtroom doors opened. An elderly man walked inside. Richard's face turned white. No. The man took the witness stand. My name is Thomas Ellis. I served as Chief Financial Officer of Bennett Biotech. Victor quickly stood. Mr. Ellis resigned years ago. Thomas nodded sadly. I resigned because I was threatened. The room fell silent. I was ordered to alter accounting records and fabricate evidence against MS Bennett. When I refused, I was told my career would be destroyed. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. Do you swear this testimony is truthful? I do. Thomas removed a sealed envelope from his briefcase. I've carried these original financial ledgers for 12 years. I promised myself I'd reveal them if MS Bennett ever had the chance to clear her name. The ledgers were handed to the judge. Within minutes, the court's forensic accountant confirmed they matched Clara's evidence perfectly. Every accusation against her had been manufactured. Every financial crime pointed back to Richard Holloway and Daniel Bennett. Across the courtroom, reporters rushed from their seats to relay breaking news to their editors. Television producers interrupted scheduled programming. Outside the courthouse, cameras multiplied as word spread that one of the country's most admired businessmen was being exposed in open court. Richard looked across the room at Clara. For the first time in 12 years, he saw not the woman he believed he had defeated, but the woman he had underestimated. Clara met his frightened eyes without anger. She hadn't come to destroy him. She had come to let the truth speak for itself. And in that courtroom, the truth had become louder than every lie Richard Holloway had ever told. The courtroom was so quiet that the sound of Judge Samuel Whitmore turning the final page of the evidence echoed through the room. Every eye remained fixed on the bench. Richard Holloway, once the picture of confidence, now sat with slumped shoulders, his expensive suit unable to hide the fear written across his face. Beside him, Victor Kane stared silently at the table, knowing the case they had expected to win in minutes had completely unraveled. Judge Whitmore removed his glasses and looked first at Clara Bennett, then at the defendants. For 12 years, he began, this court has reviewed countless disputes involving contracts, businesses, and broken partnerships. But rarely have I witnessed a deception as calculated and as cruel as the one revealed. Today, the gallery remained silent. The evidence presented by MS Bennett is overwhelming. Certified financial records, forensic handwriting analysis, authenticated emails, witness testimony, and official patent documents all establish one undeniable truth. He paused before continuing. MS Clara Bennett did not steal her company. His words landed like thunder. Her company was stolen from her. A wave of whispers swept through the courtroom. Some reporters wiped away tears while others hurried to send breaking news alerts. Across the aisle, Richard closed his eyes as though hoping the nightmare would disappear. Judge Whitmore continued. This court therefore orders that ownership of Bennett Biotech, including all original patents and intellectual property wrongfully transferred to Holloway Biomedical, be immediately restored to MS. Clara Bennett? Richard's head snapped upward in disbelief. In addition, the judge said firmly, the defendants are jointly liable for financial damages, lost income, reputational harm, and legal costs. The clerk quickly calculated the judgment. The amount exceeded $300 million. Gasps filled the courtroom, but the judge wasn't finished. Based upon the evidence of forged documents, fraudulent financial records, conspiracy, and perjury presented during these proceedings, certified copies of today's record will be forwarded to the appropriate criminal authorities for immediate investigation. Richard looked as though the air had been knocked from his lungs. Everything he had built on lies was collapsing in a single afternoon. As the hearing ended, reporters crowded around Clara, microphones stretched toward her from every direction. MS Bennett, how does it feel to finally win? Do you hate the people who betrayed you? Will you seek revenge? Clara waited until the room grew quiet before answering. For many years, she said softly, I believed winning meant making those who hurt me suffer. She glanced toward Richard. But grief taught me something different. The cameras remained fixed on her. The sweetest revenge isn't watching someone lose everything. She smiled gently. It's proving they were wrong about you. Those words spread across television broadcasts, newspapers, and social media within hours. Several months later, Bennett Biotech officially reopened under Clara's leadership. Rather than celebrating her victory with luxury or public attention, she announced the creation of the Bennett Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping young inventors, researchers, and entrepreneurs whose ideas had been stolen or ignored by powerful corporations. Hundreds of hopeful innovators received grants, legal assistance, and mentorship through the foundation. Meanwhile, Holloway Biomedical filed for bankruptcy. Investors withdrew their support, board members resigned, and Richard Holloway faced multiple criminal charges. Daniel Bennett, confronted with overwhelming evidence, accepted responsibility for his role in the conspiracy. One crisp autumn afternoon, Clara stood outside the newly opened Bennett Innovation Center, watching students tour the laboratories that had once existed only in her dreams. A familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. Clara. She turned. Richard stood several feet away. Gone was the polished billionaire the world once admired. His shoulders were bent, his eyes tired, and his confidence had vanished. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, he said quietly. But I'm sorry. Clara studied him for a long moment. Then she offered a peaceful smile. I forgave you years ago. Richard looked surprised. I didn't forgive you for your sake, she continued. I forgave you because carrying hatred would have made me your prisoner forever. She looked toward the young researchers laughing inside the building. My future was always worth more than my past. Without another word, Clara walked through the glass doors of the Innovation Center. The reporters who had followed her lowered their cameras, realizing the story had never truly been about revenge. It had been about dignity, about truth, about refusing to let betrayal define a life. As the doors closed behind Clara Bennett, one lesson remained for everyone who had once dismissed her as nobody important. Never underestimate the quiet person carrying the truth. One day, the world may finally recognize who they really are.